electricity consumers in Nigeria are reeling from another shock as distribution companies, that's DISCOs, hike meter prices by a whopping 28.03%. Now, this comes just months after a previous increase, further straining the already burdened pockets of Nigerians. Now, across the continent, a Donald Trump presidency could have significant implications for Africa. His America First mantra may lead to a decline in U.S. involvement in international affairs, potentially weakening global institutions and alliances that benefit Africa. This is The Conversation. I'm Darshan Usman. Let's talk. Now, electricity meter prices in Nigeria have gone up again, marking the second increase in just 4 months. The cost of a single-phase meter has increased by about 28% from around 117,000 naira to 149,800 naira, while prices for three-phase meters have also increased. Now, the price changes are due to Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, that's NERC, deregulating the market, allowing different meter vendors to set their own prices through competition. While the goal is to create a more competitive market with better pricing and also service in the future, the immediate effect is higher cost for consumers. Now, joining us to discuss more on this, we have two guests. First of all, we have Dr. Sam Amadi, Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. And we also have George Etomi, founder George Etomi and Partners from the U.S. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so let me begin with George Etomi. Now, George, in April 2024, NERC deregulated the meter prices under the Meter Asset Provider Scheme, that's the MAP scheme, allowing for competitive bidding. How has this shift impacted the prices, and what factors are behind this sharp increase?
Well, it's not rocket science. Everything around you is increasing, and the cost of delivery of goods and services generally has gone up following the crash in our currency and, of course, the exchange rate fluctuations. Just to make one quick correction, it's not the DISCOs that are increasing the prices. They may be the ones informing you, but as you correctly noted, the meter prices have been deregulated, and in 2018, following the meter asset provider regulation, there are now meter asset providers that are approved and registered with NERC, and they are the ones who negotiate directly the cost of these meters. And whenever they reach an alignment, the DISCOs are informed, even though there's a partnership between both of them to ultimately deliver the meters to the consumers. So again, it's just a factor of what's going on all around us. Inflation, exchange rate fluctuation, most of these meters are brought in, even those who are manufactured, here, also have to rely on component parts from abroad. So they're impacted by the macroeconomic factors that everybody's experiencing. Everything around us is going on, but it's a pity. But it's important to have meters, because meters create trust between consumers and the utility company. So it is important that these meters are rapidly deployed. There's a lot of metering gap. We have different figures from 4 to 7 billion. But for as long as you have this metering gap existing, then you have the unwholesome practice of estimated billing, which everybody's so upset about, and we don't like it either. But it is important that everybody takes advantage of the National Mass Metering Program, which has been brought on by the Presidential Metering Initiative for the rapid deployment of meters to consumers.
Okay.
It is important that consumers insist on being metered, now that electricity prices are going up.
Okay. Now let's hear from Dr. Amadi about the recent increase in electricity meter prices. You know, this has actually caused a significant concern, rising by 28% for a single-phase meters. Now, how much, you know, of the factors that George Atomi has actually mentioned, how much of this is actually linked to deregulation of the, you know, metering sector?
Well, I think when they talk about deregulation, I think it might not have much impact because, again, the real point here is pricing based on tax, based on forex issues. So, for example, there's a meter price, usually in dollar. And once you have forex change as inflators, foreign exchange changes, it impacts directly it's a pass-through cost. It goes straight to the cost of meter. So what has happened with deregulation is basically like saying, okay, there are meter providers, asset providers, and also discos who own the network. I myself, I don't support that level of deregulation because we feel that the disco should have control over metering because it involves also the protection of the revenue. What we did when we were there was CAPME, which was a way of crowdsourcing finance, because part of the crisis of metering is first is financing, the other is logistics, deployment. So you need to have enough money, make the investment, because ideally meter costs are recovered through normal tariffs you pay. And therefore that means that the distributor should be able to have access to capital to invest for 10, 20 years and gradually amortize those costs and recover the money. But that presupposes that the disco has the capacity to access those funds. So the crisis we have in the sector is that the discos, the owners of the discos, are not able to finance metering in the normal manner in which the meter cost is already factored in the tariffs, in which case there should be no special payments for meter. It's basically that the meter is part of the tariffs, and then people pay their tariffs, and over time, you recover from the recovery, you reinvest for replacement and expansion of metering because of increase in customer base. But because of those financial constraints, we started doing, first, they had what they call meter maintenance fee, where they tried to leverage financing to finance so-called meter maintenance, which we cancelled. So what we have today is that metering now is a special program, whether government is intervening or the World Bank is providing support or customers themselves are also providing, because the investment, the financial capacity of the market cannot carry on metering in the way it ought to be. So the whole liberalization or deregulation is to allow for non-disco operators to also play in the market by providing meter and having some kind of accessory functions relating to billing, metering, and which ordinarily should be only the disco doing that. The disco ought to bill, the disco ought to provide meter, because that's how they control their revenue.
Yes, Doctor. But what long-term benefits? What long-term benefits does NERC expect from this deregulation, Dr. Amadi?
Well, two things they take. One is that maybe it's a way of expanding business support services. So these new asset providers could borrow money, invest, make profit. In a way, it's to expand the business side of it. Two, they hope that it will cure the lack of the financial crisis I said in the disco side, which means with new asset providers coming with their financing, they would expand metering. But so far, if you look at by the time we left, metering access was about, let's say, 42-43%. It's not much different now. Although one can argue that new customers will come into the customer base and increase need for meter. So for me, I think that the deregulation is not a driver of significant efficiency in the sector. Maybe if they remain with CAPME and allow the discos access finance from customers through crowdsourcing in a manner that, like we did them 14 days, the discos must meter. Over time, the discos will be able to meter many of the customers through finance that customers provide, and which customers get back through a very transparent energy credit system, which allows them to recover their money without imposing hardship on the finance of the discos, because discos will give them credit as they consume over time, 2-3 years. So in my view, this increase is born out of macroeconomic fundamentals. The devaluation of the currency means that each meter cost is now maybe 3 times or 2 times what it used to cost before devaluation.
Okay, now we're not even talking about the percentage now, Mr. Etomi. Let's talk about the regional price variations, because these prices differ widely across discos. For example, Eco Disco charges between 135,987 naira and 161,000 naira. And that's for a single-phase meter, while Abuja Discos, charges 123 to 147, and there's so much disparity, when it comes to these regions. Why are there such significant regional disparities?
Well, let me quickly just address the points about that my good friend Sam talked about the discos, liquidity crisis leading to MAP and all those things. The truth is that the assurances that were given to the discos upon the inception of privatization that cost-reflective tariffs will be allowed never happened. So it was a question of getting the discos more or less to subsidize the sector, and it was not going to happen. Under Samamadi's NERC, they introduced CAPME, and I agree entirely with him that CAPME was working until it was inexplicably abolished in place of MAP. MAP, like the discos would have experienced, are having problems themselves with agreeing on what the price should be. The reason there was a drastic meter slowdown a few months ago when consumers couldn't get meters was because they couldn't arrive at a price with the regulator over based on all these factors that were mentioned. Now, why the price differential? Well, again, there are market factors. Perhaps it's easier for the disco suppliers to get to the markets, Lagos, because most of them are resident in Lagos. The cost of pushing it up north or up country to various other places to would add some additional cost to it. And that's why you see those price differentials. Not different from how your petroleum products sell at different prices in different parts of the country. So that really, the factor is, like I said, it's market driven.
Okay. Now you talked about market factors, but aren't there concerns about quality or concerns about compliance with quality standards? Especially when multiple vendors are allowed to operate across different discos.
I agree entirely with you. That is something we should never take away from our side. In fact, I need to make one very important point. For many consumers, the moment you pay the disco for your meter, it is meant to be installed without any further assurance, because we have consumers who complain that at the point of installation, the installers, who are not the discos, demand for fresh money. There is no such money. Once if that's done, it should be reported immediately, because it's an attempt to fleece consumers, and it is very wrong. The discos frown upon it, and consumers should stand up for their rights. Again, we go back to what the factors are doing. One thing I think I should also mention to you is that there's a migration from the current metering standards to a new standard, the STS model. And it is important that consumers know that there's going to be a cutover where their current meters must comply with this international standard, which assures that there is some connection between the point where you get your sales and the point at which you pay for it. That communication exists. This is going to be standard practice, and it's global. Initially, the date set for it was November this year, but it's now been moved to sometime next year. But it's important consumers know about it. Right now, meters being deployed comply with that standard, but there are old meters who haven't complied, and those meters need to comply, because if they don't, by the cut-over date, they will be unable to vend, and it's going to be inconvenience to the consumer and a loss to the disco. So both parties should be on top of this. I thought I should seize the opportunity to mention.
All right, thank you so much for that. Now let's come back to you, Dr. Amadi. With deregulation, meter prices will now be set through competitive bidding, no doubt. But how does this affect the relationship between discos and meter vendors themselves? Will this improve transparency in the sector?
I think no. I think really, my view will be, of course, history shows that simple systems work best. And what is a simple system? The simple system is that the disco should be totally in charge of vending, billing, and customer care. The disco is the supplier of the power. So this system of leveraging, so the meter asset providers, competitive bidding, which means least cost price, would create a coordination program. Again, let's follow from what happened with unbundling. Yes, unbundling logic is that when you unbundle, you probably create more efficiency. That's why I have the discos, the gencos, the transmission company, they are going to make investment. But it comes with a problem. The problem is that with unbundling, you enhance coordination, failure, and problem. You need to have better technology, managerial coordination to manage disco, genco transmission. And that's why it's part of the narrative for the national shutdown, the grid collapse from the TCM perspective is, the discos cannot pick load. Discos say, genco, transmission cannot drop it where we need it. What's the problem? Coordination. So when you now get back to the distribution side and you create additional layering, it seems to me that except you are sophisticated in your protocols and create processes that ensure efficient handshake, meaning the procurement process is okay, the discos side is okay, the asset providers have the skills and functionality, and they are working, harmoniously with the discos, so that when, for example, like I said, you're supposed to meter a customer, the asset provider who is doing that is not going to ask for extra charge because perhaps the money has gone to the disco, or if the money is going to be recovered through tariffs, there's a system in which settlement can happen harmoniously. The disco has a component, the installer has a component. So there are many variables you have to put in place and ensure that they work well to ensure efficient deployment. So I would always urge that it's better.
Okay, but when you talk about efficient deployment, Doctor, you talked about efficient deployment, but for many Nigerians, the price increases, are a heavy burden. What do you think the impact will be on the consumers? I'm talking especially, those in low-income households.
Two things. That will be, first, if the price of meter is high, and of course, if not factoring the tariff, and like my friend George said, the tariffs are not either cost-reflective or not even fully recovered. It means that there will be less deployment of meter. That's number one. Two, customers who are buying meter, paying for meter will pay less. Three, because they are going to pay less, and where we see tariffs increase because of both forex, the macroeconomic indicators are going up, and as well as cost of power production, whether it's gas or other things, the implication is that there will be more tendency to bypass, to steal power. People don't really care about the function, the relationship between excess costs in a depressing economy with the tendency to steal power, to bypass, to commit all kinds of fraud. And with our low technology in dictation, with our very liquid system that does not punish enough, provide sanction, we might see that ironically we will end up damaging the revenue of the discos. Because if meter is more expensive, billing by estimation will increase, lower meter rollout, except there's going to be some kind of subsidy or fund, which I doubt. So the implication will be cumulatively that you may have less meter rollout, higher prices, more cost of self-provision of meter, and then the tendency for customers to bypass and collusion with the corrupt officials in the various distribution or generation or distribution companies to bypass and steal power and then compound the revenue crisis. So I think we should think carefully about this, ensuring that metering is expanded, meter access. And to do that is not to expand cost, it's not even to create multiple layers where, the reasonable profit of all the players would add up to increase in the meter cost. I would want it to be kept simple. I want it to be such that maybe in the next medium to long term, discos will not have to deal with customers about meter. They have a rollout plan, they roll it out regularly, they get paid through the tariffs, which is what it's supposed to be. Let's not lose sight that ideally, what it should be is that these prices have been approved by NERC. And once approved, they'll be part of the tariff regime. And then if there are increased variations, when the tariff changes, you keep indexing them, and so on and so forth, and the metering will keep going on, and customers will not even know that they're paying for meter because it's part of the services that this schools provide. All
right, let's hear from Mr. Itomi. Mr. Itomi, earlier you did talk about how it is very important for every household to, have access to meter, and, because it helps with access to meter comes access to electricity. But according to, research, 50% of Nigerian consumers are still unmetered. Now, I'm speaking to the low-income households now. How do you think that this price increase would actually affect affects efforts to close the metering gap? You did talk about that as well, and also provide more accurate billing to consumers who have been on estimated billing, those who cannot afford the meters. How do you expect, them to close the gap?
Well, first of all, there are some metering initiatives. I mentioned to you that under the presidential metering initiatives, under the World Bank scheme, meters are actually being provided and paid for by the government for ultimate delivery to consumers in partnership with the discos at some point through graduated recovery. It's recovered from consumers. The problem is because it is free in inverted commas, the rollout tends to be a little slower than it should be. And so those who then opt to pay for it are given priority. But having said that, there is a general recognition in the markets that there is a need to close our metering gap. The regulator is very strict with regards to estimated billing. And if you notice recently, some discos were fined heavily for breaching these estimated billing regulations. So no disco finds it palatable now to be estimating, contrary to the belief in general quarters, because once the regulator gets wind of it, that disco is sanctioned very heavily.
Are you saying that they've also improved, when it comes to service delivery as well?
Yes, there is general improvement when it comes to service delivery. The issue now is that with us seeing market forces more at play, I'm saying that consumers should be insisting on their rights. If you are paying for a product, then you must insist you get full value for that product. And if there are other hiccups, and we know there are hiccups in the system, some have nothing to do with discos, like the frequent grid collapses that you have, and other issues like that. But when it comes to the last mile, which is what the disco represents to the consumers, service delivery is improving, but there's still a lot of ground to cover. I maintain that it is the meters that create trust between the consumer and disco. And it is important that every consumer believes that they are paying a fair value for the service that they are getting, and not that they're being exploited, which can happen when you don't get meters and you run the risk of being estimated. But one point Dr. Samuel Madi made, which we should not ignore, is energy theft. Because each time we allow this metering gap issue to persist, the pressure on consumers can lead them to steal power. And this they can do in collusion with some corrupt disco officials. And that's one of the risks we run. So you still find that electricity is being consumed, but this time there is no cost recovery. So that revenue assurance is what these meters represent. So massive deployment and eventually complete metering is the solution.
Okay. Now, you talked about, Mr. Etomi actually talked about, how some consumers would collude with some officials to steal power. But what do you think the government can actually do about this? And I'm speaking to you, Dr. Amadi. Should there be a cap on prices or some form of subsidy, from the government?
Well, I think 3 things should be done. I think government should look at the cost-benefit analysis and maybe do public provision of meters. If you look at areas where spending money, there could be a domino effect if government seriously puts funds to fast-track metering of customers. It could go a long way to address revenue shortfall both on the disco side and on the consumer side, because affordability is also important. The reason why we're not seeing the crisis of affordability is because we don't have availability. If power increases and people cannot consume because they can't afford it, they begin to see a crisis. So we need to ensure that there's affordability and availability. And I think considering metering as a somewhat semi-public good, something that we could invest in is good. The second thing is also to improve incentive on the discos to roll out meter. It can go with pricing. It also goes with capping. Capping, for example, some people argue that some discos, arguably, may find it maybe at some point better to estimate some customers where the cost of estimation is low or where the cost of collection is not that high than metering. There's some argument, I don't know how empirically verifiable, that some discos will have incentive not to go around all the cost of metering if they can, get their money through estimation. And so if you cap, like NERC has said, okay, we cap, let's say reasonably cap at 100 megawatts, a kilowatt hour per month, let's say, something like that. Then we can say, this is the price you can give people who have no meter, as long as it's reasonable and reflects the average of real-time supply in a cluster. And this is realism. The metering gap is huge. That with the revenue profile of this country and the revenue profile of the discos themselves, we shouldn't expect rapid completion of metering of customer base. The finances may not be there. And so we can live with some degree of estimation, some degree of even post-paid metering, but it requires a methodology and discipline, a regulatory process where even those who are exposed to those unmetered customers can be reasonably protected through a transparent and sort of a methodology for estimated billing. When we're NERC, we tried that as a methodology. Some CEOs argue that maybe it's not that strong. It gives them a lot of burden and cost, but we can improve the methodology. We can't really realistically meter all this customer with the revenue profile of this.
And with all of these things, with all of these things that you've mentioned, will they lead to more investment in the power sector?
Sure, because look, if you are able to create trust in the financial ability of the industry, if you're able to improve metering and therefore protect revenue protection for discos and also trust for consumers. Let's not forget these two economies. The consumers want to be sure that they can manage, what a meter does, the meter helps you to manage your cost. You can reduce your consumption through, shutting down power. But the key point here is the investors will come in because they know 3 things happen. One, that you are guaranteeing revenue, not necessarily by increasing price necessarily, but also by revenue protection, that power consumed can be paid for, can be tracked and paid for. 2, investment will come because they know that this is a less volatile market where incentive to steal power, to commit crime against power, and to refuse to pay collection losses will be less, because once there is confidence and the consumers can know that they are being billed according to close enough to consumption, even with that metric, it means that there will be more propensity to pay bills, and a market actually thrives on postpaid. Prepaid metering is an invention, really, for third world countries. In many parts of Europe, in America today, They are still doing postpaid. People are paying bills, but have a sense that there's certainty, there's less volatility. The operators know that those bills will be paid. And if they're not paid, there's a credit process to track and recover. So I think that if we improve both metering and estimation of or meter customers to be more certain and clear and verifiable and transparent, we will get more investment, because then the market begins to look like a real market that is often based on credit, on the fact that the customer trusts the producer, and the producer trusts the consumer from time to time.
All right, now let's quickly hear from you before we wrap up, Mr. Itomi. Do you see the deregulation of the metering system, you know, as a key step to the broader energy transition for Nigeria? And should we expect, you know, further hikes, price hikes in the future?
Well, yes, the answer is yes. Like Mr. Sam Amadi said, once there is revenue assurance, an investor will come in because they know that their investment is protected and there is a fair return, fair yield on that investment. And the power sector needs investments. The power sector needs new money, plenty of it. So it is important that through regulation and through policies that we ensure that there is a level playing field that allows investors to bring in their money and feel secure that they can get reasonable returns from that. With regard to whether or not we should look at how this.
Sorry, can you just wrap up in like 30 seconds, sir?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the market is still a bright market. With the new 2023 Act, which has now disaggregated the market and allowing states to come in all the full value chain, you will begin to see more dynamics in the power sector. And I think the central grid system has outlived its usefulness. And once we begin to look at what the subnationals will be doing, Lagos State just recently sent out dates for power generation. Other states are setting up their various power outfits. I think the future is bright. What we need to do is just to make sure that through efficiency, it's affordable to the average consumer, so that there's mutual expectation from investors and consumers alike.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Sam Amadi, Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, and also George Itomi, founder, George Itomi and Partners. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the conversation and speaking on this.
Thank you.